Hi, everybody. Steve Cady here at Bowling Green State University, and I'm wearing one of our brand new branded shirts. Our dean gave us a Schmidt-Horst College of Business shirts to all the faculty, which is everybody really likes those kinds of things. So um, I'm right now in my office on our farm, just down the road from the university. I'm here with Tenneson. And our program is sponsored by a few different groups. One is our doctorate in organization development and change, which we have several students here, and even committee members from our dissertations are here, and faculty and students. So it's really nice to see you all here. And our friends of the program are here. We also have the All Things Change webinar podcast series that I do, and we do that through Nexus for Change. And it's a wonderful group of partners. All of us care about the human side of change in organizations, and that we know is very important. And it's coming back, and it relates to the topic for the day around self-care. And Tennis and I were chatting a little bit, and one of the things we're curious about, if you could enter this into the chat, we're going to ask you to do a little reflection. We're going to do box breathing, just a quick little exercise to get grounded. And as you do, if you could reflect on what conspired to bring you here today, and what are you curious about that brought you here today? And so we'll do the box breathing, which some of you know, or most of you do, where you breathe in for 4 seconds, pause for 4 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds, and pause for 4 seconds. And as you do, just reflect on being here, being present, and what brought you here today. And I'll begin. And so let's breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out slowly. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold that. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's take another few seconds to reflect on what brought me here today. What am I curious about? And maybe what conspired to make today possible for you to be here? How'd the universe support you in being here today? And if you could, enter that into the chat. And Tennyson, when you're ready, if you could share your thoughts on what you reflected on.
So, hi. I think in what you just guided, Steve, there's there's things that stand out. I am a person and a practitioner that is drawn into the narrative that says, let's try to be good humans. And there's something, I think, quite simple and kind about that narrative. And there's also something that's fierce about that narrative. Like, I think those of us who are living with this interest in the human side of change, there's something something very committed that's required. So all of that is in play for me. If I go to the breath part of it, just the simple breath, it's a stilling thing for me. Like, I am the kind of human that loves and needs that space to probably just feel a little bit of my own heart. I can feel the excitement of a rush or of lots of thoughts that come, a quickness that I sometimes appreciate. And these are all things that are appreciated, I think, in society as a whole. But boy, to reclaim a little inner practice and maybe shared practice of stillness, those are compelling things to me. Like, that's the kind of world I want to live in. That's the kind of world I want to contribute to. And that's the kind of like deep humanness that that I feel like many of us are learning needs to be a part of how we human beings adventure into rather complex things. All of that. And then just some excitement, Steve, you and the team and some very familiar faces here. I'm glad that we're in playfully in cahoots together to, experiment and
Mhm.
wonder out loud and wander out loud. And I'm also glad that we're just like we get to be in some learning together. And these formats for learning together, they waken my heart, I suppose.
Mhm. Yeah, and when I look at what people shared in the chat, a lot of them were talking about they're in a place where um, they're choosing self-care. They're in a place where it's lots going on right now, and they wanted to be here to have a chance. So I think slowing down as we got started is nice. I think that was a good place for us to start. In the title we talked about being mischievously playful, in our exploration. What are your thoughts around that in terms of our session today, in terms of what you would like to get out of today's session?
Yeah. Okay. So sure, I'm just going to play it like this is in some ways a continuance of the conversations that we've had, both in email and in a voice-to-voice
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
So, interesting things go into descriptions that create little marketing pieces, etc. And you and I played a little bit with those, but then some words just come in, and the mischievous and playful part of that was all there. I think one of the things, let's see, well, let me go one more step back. I feel like this is a conversation, and at some level, this is a conversation among the however 19 of us or so that are gathered here. And in some way, this is a little bit influenced by Steve, what you and I have been talking about for a while here. I think that I'm not sure what the we is here, but it feels collective to me, are trying to reestablish a narrative of who we are as human beings in the world. And a part of that that's interesting to me is to maybe reduce some of the certainty narratives and reintroduce some of the mystery narratives. And that means some playfulness. So it's like I want to challenge the story that we live from in the first place that says maybe our playfulness and our mischief is an utterly essential capacity and skill and joy to have with one another. And I also feel, Steve, like, complexity is a big topic. Like we live in such a connected world. There is a Zen phrase that I love and I use quite often in my work of facilitation and all of the stuff that goes with that. The Zen phrase is 7 words, 3 sentences. It says, everything is connected, everything changes, pay attention. Everything is connected, everything changes, pay attention. And with the amount of interconnectedness that we have, and then probably feed in a few stories here also about work ethic and some of the really heavily baked in obligation sorts of or productivity narratives, it can create a real space where our self-care suffers. Let me pull that down in one thing also. Can you hear me, Steve? Are we okay?
Yep. You sound great.
Let me pull that down for a minute. I grew up in a family. This is Tenneson me that desires to do good things in the world and be respected and appreciated as being helpful and contributing and all of that kind of stuff. I have a pretty strong work ethic narrative in me that is mostly good and sometimes very, very challenging and harmful even. Okay. And if I jump ahead into some self-care kinds of things, like it's important for me to do some breath and some meditation and some contemplative journal writing and some of those kinds of things. And for the longest of times, I used to feel like that was outside of my work. That's what I do after the work is done. And I know there's a lot of people like that. And at some point, perhaps because I was starting to feel fed up with myself, I changed the way that I conceived that time. Instead of that time being outside of work, as much as possible, I started saying that was part of my day. And so if I meditated for 20 minutes, or if I rode the exercise bike for 20 minutes, or if I journaled for 20 minutes, I started thinking of that as part of my workday rather than being outside of the workday. And oddly enough, that made a pretty big change in how I was feeling about, I don't know, some more integrated part of me and some more self-caring part of me. There's little changes to make, I think, that have impact.
What comes to mind are a couple things. One is the notion of you have to go slow to go fast.
Yeah.
Right. And the other is this notion of scientific management, which has really influenced how leaders lead in our world. And the whole notion of time and motion studies and getting the most productivity out of a person, right? Shoveling coal is the original Hawthorne, some of the original, right? The Taylorism and all that kind of stuff. So we got to have a big challenge, right? How have you found like getting a leader to recognize what you just said as critical to breaking out of this paradigm of scientific approach to treating humans as machines, and to get into that notion of slowing down? What have you found in your work with leaders? Have you had a certain way in which you approach it with leaders to get them to shift their leadership into that direction away
Yeah,
from?
I mean, it's super interesting, Steve, because it is such a deeply ingrained story, and in part for how you're naming it. Like when we go back into some of the earlier organizational studies, that was part of my educational background also. It is such a deeply ingrained story. And so I find that one of the things that I'm trying to do with people is change that story. And we're naming some of it already. Like, what if we said the story were, what if the, the main aspects of the story need to include how we develop and grow as a community together, or how we develop and grow with love and kindness and consciousness and flow. These are some favorites for me. These are all things that matter. And I think what I find is that, there needs to be, there needs to be some experience, and there needs to be some deep, like, connection with one another. I love being able to host retreats, and not everybody can go to retreats and things like that. But when we have enough space where people can actually not just like cognitively conceptualize slowing down or more integrated living, where they actually feel it and take some breath together and recognize we don't need to rush, maybe interrupt some of the productivity story, or if you want to keep the productivity story, make it productive as a human spirit, that kind of thing. Like, I think people are hungry for that. And be curious what you think of this. I feel people's resistance sometimes, like, oh, are we really going to do this? Is this really going to work? Why are we doing this? I'm a pretty busy person, etc. When people, once they taste some of that slowing down, or maybe more of that integrated wholeness, I think it activates something that's already in them that they want to do. They want to do more of.
So slowing down into the, as Dave says, into the right pace,
Sure.
slowing down into a balance, and I think the word integration also jumps up for me. Yeah. And then there's, that all relates to this notion of quiet quitting. Are people quietly quitting in order to find that pace? Because they're not leaving their job, they're just slowing down. What
does that mean for you? Say a little bit more about the quiet quitting part.
So it's a term that's, it's been coming out it's probably been in the last year. And there's a bit more research being done on it. What they're noticing is it comes out of the literature around organizational citizenship. And the literature on citizenship is about how people choose to do things that are not required of them in their job. The extra little things like having a birthday party for their coworkers at work, or picking up a piece of garbage when you're walking into the office, or doing a little extra that's not in your job description. And so commitment and citizenship is about doing those little extra things. And then there's this notion of commitment to the job, right? And there's all this stuff. But what they're noticing is that what the researchers are noticing is that there are people that are pulling back on doing extras, and they're only doing the basics, and they're quietly quitting by not being citizens in order to take more care of themselves, maybe, or in order to stop doing the things that they feel are extra,
Yeah.
and so they essentially are doing their job at a minimum requirement.
Well, that's an interesting one, Steve. I think there's a line there, right? On the one hand, when people simplify, and maybe this drifts into some little section of the quiet quitting, but when people simplify based on trying to preserve a longer arc of themselves or themselves with team, with community, I mean, that's an important thing. That to me strikes me as some of the thoughtful reflectiveness that we need. If people are quiet quitting out of apathy, like just screw this, this is never going to end. I'm not willing to kill myself or burn myself out here. Then, that says something about the kinds of systems that we're creating. And we live in all of that. So, if I'm thinking out loud about some of what those of us who care about the human aspects of change, or the human side of change, as you named it, it seems to me that in addition to doing, quote, nice things like, okay, a party and we have cake and that kind of stuff, that the deeper hunger that we're trying to touch, I think, with people is perhaps a restored sense of breath and a restored sense of belonging together. Like, I think, or this is the kind of world that I'm interested in, and the kind of change work that I'm interested in. Can we create these formats where we restore deliberately some of the deeper meaning and purpose of why we are human beings, first of all, and why we are in something together? I think it's great when we do nice things like the birthday cakes, right? But the deeper hunger that I see in people is wanting to restore some more meaningful sense of what our belonging is, what our aspirational quality is with one another, what we desire to do and accomplish or be with one another. And all of that, like, how does, that's sort of a bigger thread of things here, but how does it connect to self-care? It just means that, like if we're starting with too small of a story, then self-care becomes, I think, some more shallow things. And if that's the starting point, that's fine. That's great. If birthday cakes is what we need, then we do that. But when we can create or add to a culture that wants to be curious, or knows to be curious together, or knows to explore some additional depth with one another, then I think that we're really coming into a different layer of what self-care even means. That's a lot. Let me pause there.
Yeah, no, I think about the opposite of the birthday cake is making sure you check your emails 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Always be on and be available to work.
Yeah, like those are impressive and punishing narratives, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm curious about it. Maybe you could share with us when you first came upon this notion of self-care for yourself. Could you tell us the story of when you decided it was important? Was there a moment where you decided self-care was important for you?
Yeah, I'll maybe weave a few things in there, but the one that stands out to me that I was thinking of as we were just checking in a bit this morning is a bit COVID enhanced. So I'm going back into COVID time. And to me, let's see, it was 2020 when COVID started, right? So I think this was towards the November or so of 2020. And, that's where, I already work at home, but with all of the stuff that was going on, the isolation that was going on, et cetera, lots of computer time. There's always stuff that I and many of us can be doing. I just reached this point. It sounds silly now, but I reached this point where I went out for a walk. Walks are not uncommon for me, but I get lost in a bunch of other things. I went out for a walk and realized, like, I was going crazy. I felt like I was going a bit nutty with some of the absence of the physical, some of the complexity of the world. And for me, part of what I needed to do is just get outside. And when I was walking that particular day, I decided, I need to do this every day, even if it's just 3 minutes. Go out, walk to the mailbox, come back. And I live in Utah. I live in a urban meets rural community. I live in a high desert meets base of mountains community. There's mountains where I live. And I just found like I needed to see some of that. I needed to feel and see some bigger picture. Or some bigger existence of life out there. And I just made a decision that day. It sounds small and silly and simple at some level, but maybe that's what some of us need the encouragement for, is the small, simple, and silly that can start a pattern. For me, the pattern that it started was, okay, I'm going to walk every day. I'm going to get outside, even to the mailbox and back. And it ended up being, of the next 200 days, because I was counting, I guess some part of me needed to count that. Like I went for 190 of the 200 days, something like that. And that was pretty good commitment to some self-care in that way. That was one of the things for me. But let me throw back another question at you, Steve.
Can I just throw one thing at you before you do that? It's what you hit me with is that it's not quantity, it's quality, not in terms of but how much time. Like, does self-care have to be an hour? Like you took 3 minutes, right? So what struck me is that you can do self-care and just in small little moments. And there needs to be some consistency over time. You got to take care of yourself over time, like brushing your teeth, right? It's a hygiene factor. It's like self-care is hygienic.
Yeah, well, maybe in search of principle, maybe what lives behind that is related to time commitment, but not dependent upon it, perhaps is that, this is what I'll speculate on, if it adds a bit more presence with self, then chances are it's contributing something good. So for example, I could say that part of my self-care is I have a cup of coffee in the morning because it brings some joy, because I love it, And it might just be that I enjoy the coffee, period, or I need the time, period. But if there's something that lives behind that, like if that's my self-care act, then if it is somehow rooted in a desire or a reality of being just a bit more present and joyful with myself. If my coffee is my reprieve, if it's like, okay, it's going to be a super darn full, busy day, etc. But for these 5 minutes, I've got my coffee. If that adds or grows some quality of stillness, appreciation, love of self, damn it, I'm going to treat myself to a coffee, and it's going to have some chocolate in it. If those little things, even the little things, add a bit more presence, then I want to believe that, that changes the way that we interact with people when we get to the office or the team or the community hall. Mm-hmm. So it might be, does it add some presence? 16 seconds, 3 minutes, or sometimes the bigger ones, right?
Mm-hmm. A retreat or something like that.
Or it just like, it's a lot of courage. I mean, think how this feels actually. Sometimes I feel like, just because of the patterns of contemporary society, we end up defending the self-care things that we do, like almost apologetically. I go to the gym for an hour, and we might like nest that in some narrative of apology. And mm-hmm. I'm not trying to lift up a completely self-indulgent world. I'm actually trying to lift the core, like some of what you're saying about how do we, so that we can participate well in a very complex world, how do we tend to ourselves such that we are available both for ourselves and for others in the healthiest ways that we can find.
Yeah. Ooh. Thank you. I think we talked about getting the groups, small groups, to have a little conversation and come back with some questions for you.
Let's do that. But can I do one more thing with you first?
Yeah. Sure.
Because one of the things that I notice is some like self-care has got some particular connotation to it, where some people just feel like they're just rolling their eyes. Oh God, if I hear one more person talk about self-care. And I'm kind of curious about that part of it also. Most recently with a friend who had just retired from a long educational career. And she was referencing that, and she was talking about like it kind of had this eye roll quality of who's got time for self-care in it. And I know that some people respond that way. And boy, some people are troopers. They just keep on going.
Mm-hmm.
I just wonder how you've encountered that, or how have you seen that in your journeys?
I think that um, there's an expectation, for example,
Mm.
uh, to show up and outworks everybody else to prove something, right? And I think that for me, the thing that comes to mind is I'm really thinking about how presence. I think let's see here. I think Dave talked about presence, and there's been some conversation in here around taking 16 seconds. The thing I think about is this notion of being present with ourselves is like being present with others, and I think that's the key. So self-care is about presence with self and presence with others, not necessarily all at the same time, right? So sometimes there's presence with self, but there's this research that's really good, and they were asking parents, the kids sitting with their parent, their dad or their mom, when do you see your, when do you see them, most happy? How are they doing, and what's going on in your relationship with your parent? What matters to you? And they didn't talk about how much time they spent with each other. They just talked about wanting to be with each other and be present with each other. In short, they talked about the idea that it wasn't the quantity of the time, it was the quality of the presence
Sure.
with each other. And the kids remember when their parents are present to them. Like when my son says, get the phone out of the way, right? Look, sit with me, look at me, connect with me. But also, do we do that with ourselves? Because I think that sometimes um, being present with ourselves is hard because we are looking at things and getting in touch with things. And maybe being busy helps us avoid being present with ourselves or others on a deeper level. That's what I'm reflecting on as you were talking, is it's really about, sometimes we do it to avoid, sometimes we do it because we don't know any better, sometimes we do it because we feel we're forced to, sometimes we, but I think being aware and paying attention to why we are being present with ourselves, and being just noticing the presence with self or others, that kind of thing. So
Cool. Yeah, presence is a medium, actually.
yeah,
Well,
yeah, but why don't we open up the room and have you all spend 5 minutes checking in your groups about what what is presence, what are you reflecting on with the concept of not presence but self-care, and what we were just talking about here. But what are your thoughts around self-care, and what's a question you want to bring back to engage Tenneson in, or the group in? Maybe bring a question back. So I'm going to open up the rooms, take 5 minutes just to say hi, talk a little bit about self-care, and bring a question back or a reflection back, or both. Hi, Marilise. Welcome. We're just going into small groups. You can go join a group and listen in and get warmed up um, to the group that's there. So Tennyson, I'm curious. So what's your reaction to what we talked about? What's emerging for you in our conversation that might be surprising you or new for you? For me, it's this notion of time. That's what I'm really taking away today. That I personally feel that I need to have the perfect situation to do self-care. So what I mean by that is if I don't have the right conditions where I have a space to go to and I can meditate with candles and crystals and, or have 30 minutes or this, that I just don't do it because it's not like the perfect self-care moment. Like so I'm realizing what I'm taking away is self-care doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be done right, doesn't have to have perfect conditions. And that I don't have to do it if I can just do something that is kind to myself or kind with someone else, being present and kind with myself and with someone else.
Yeah.
I think that's what I'm taking away. I kind of know it, but I'm really taking it away from our conversation.
Good. And welcome, Marley. You're kind of jumping in. Whoops, lost her there. Yeah. So Steve, I relate to that. Okay. And maybe the part of me that seeks some principle most of the time, like you're naming some of that, kindness, presence. The part of me that seeks a principle in all of that, I think also lands on just start.
Yeah, right. Just
You
do it.
don't have to do a 10-day yoga retreat or a 2-day yoga retreat. Sometimes what you do is 5 minutes at lunchtime on a Tuesday and a Thursday, and that's what you got, right? And to me, it all connects. And to me, it just adds some energy in that direction. And I think there's something kind about just saying start. Like if we start from the premise of some version of self-care matters, and then add the principle on it that just says start somewhere, then to me that feels useful and
Mm-hmm.
it feels helpful, right?
Right. Right.
When I a couple of years back, 5 years ago or so, I'm going to a doctor's appointment, regular old yearly annual kind of thing, and they're speaking. The female doctor was speaking of the kinds of things that you would expect. Make sure you exercise 3 times a week, 30 minutes, that kind of stuff. And I was just following up a little bit with her, like, so what kind of exercise? Because I just wanted to hear it. And she said, in that moment where I felt like she dropped the doctor persona and wasn't reading from the chart anymore, she said, just move.
Yeah. Just
That's
do something.
all. Just move. If it's a walk, walk. If it's a jog, jog. If it's a swim, swim. If it's a go up and down your stairs in your house 8 times, do that. But that little principle, I felt like she was just saying, let's simplify, just move. And in self-care way, I think there's something parallel to that. Just start. And then let it grow in yourself, right?
Right. Right. Right.
And I don't feel like I need to evangelize anything here. It's just like I think this is part of health and well-being for humans living in a rather complex society. Just start.
Yeah. Yeah. Right on. Right on. Yeah. I think I also was thinking about how when we first started out talking around the shame.
Yeah. Do you feel that? Do you have that in you? I have that in me. Some
I do, and there's a bit of a rebellious side to me now that,
Yeah.
or I'm kind of like I do it in rebellion, which comes actually not from a good self-care place. So I do self-care in rebellion, and I end up doing it out of spite, and I don't really get as much out of it.
Grumpy self-care.
Yeah, right.
Petulant self-care.
Yeah, yeah, because I just sometimes or arrogant self-care, like I can do it because some people are just socioeconomically struggling
Oh,
to
totally.
the point that they don't know how to take care of themselves. And because I have the benefit of a job I can depend on and I have income, I can do more to self-care. I heard about LeBron James, right? He spends $2.5 million a year on self-care.
And he can.
$2.5 million to keep him so he can play.
Beautiful.
But the thing is he's got the money to do it, right? Some people, can you imagine being a single parent, 2 kids, working in a job, and where do you find and the thing is the kids, so in that story that I was watching, I should maybe put it in the chat for people, but when I was watching the videos, the kids love their parents. Oh my God, do they love their parents? And they just yearn to have their parent be in a place where they're happy. They want them to be happy. And they're willing to sacrifice a little bit so their parent can be happy. And I think they equate that with being present to them. Like we had dinner the other night. I said mandatory family dinner. And so my 3 boys, wife and I were sitting there. And at some point then I said, what do you all need? What do we need to do maybe differently? The boys were like, oh, everything's good. The older ones, the older one, the youngest one, Logan said, we need to spend more time together as a family.
Mm-hmm.
I want us to spend more time.
Yep.
You know?
Beautiful.
Yeah. So I'm gonna bring everybody back. Because I think they're gonna have a lot of interest to share. What I'm doing here with this, our conversation today, is while they're in the breakout rooms, you and I get to continue talking, and it's recorded so we can share. Same time, I think we shared some things that I think maybe we want to summarize for them when they get back. We can say, hey, everybody, what did you talk in your breakout? And we'll share what we talked about. But I think that there's something. What's the gift in this experience we're having together that will help us be caring of ourselves more after today?
Beautiful.
I'm wondering about that.
Come. Oops.
So let's just do a 2-pronged kind of check-in. Tenneson and I were just talking, and so I'd love for you all to be able to unmute, share with us something from your conversation, anything you wish to share, or a question, and but also feel free to share that in the chat. We'll look at the chat as well. So let's just open it up to see what some of the reflections were, questions, curiosities were. And Tenneson, maybe if you want, and you can summarize your group, is there anything you want to share based on what we were talking about it while everybody was in there?
Let's hear voices first. Thank you, though.
Yeah. Okay.
We had, at the last minute of a really nice conversation, Maria Ochoa, who was talking about being in, having a career in hospitality. And so it is about making sure, taking care of everyone else, making sure they're have a great experience. But at the end, what I thought was really cool is she said, well, we've decided to say to each other, we're in the happiness business, not the hospitality business. We're in the happiness business. And my immediate reaction was, but it's too late because she jumped off, as, where do you work? I want to go there. That's where I want to spend some time for my self-care. Go where people have determined that they're going to be happy, and so are we, not just we, and they're going to be mute and subservient. Maria, is that, now tell us where you work so we can all flock to your company.
I work at a private country club in Toledo, Ohio. But we had recently hired some new senior level leaders, and they really wanted to incorporate that we are in the happiness business. So even with small standard practices of like employees of the month, we call them happiness heroes. And on our culture cards, we have like our key proficiencies and team roles that we like everybody to share. So we really instill that from top down, because again, when you work in hospitality and you work in private clubs, we're there to anticipate the needs of our guests and our members. And like I was sharing in our breakout room, if you come in and you see all the staff really angry and not really receptive to your needs, we won't get very far. So yeah.
I like that. Now we could make a college or a university a place for happiness. And that turnaround, a few smiles, frowns into smiles. All right, I'll be
More,
quiet.
I wish more organizations would adopt that kind of mentality. Imagine how much better corporate America would be.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I'll share just while we're on the topic of happiness. And Marie, do take care of self by driving carefully and maybe turning off video. You're making me anxious seeing you drive and talk. But I had a consultation yesterday with a client I'm doing some work for coming up in a couple of weeks, and the company's called Potluck Hospitality. They're one of the companies owned by a private equity firm here in San Antonio, Texas. They own some hotels, restaurants, and that sort of thing around the community. And their vision statement, which they emphasize more than once to make sure that I get across, is this. So check this out. It says, "We are architects of extraordinary experiences in hospitality, generating space in which all participants can flourish to provoke shared joy." Shared joy, like this community. I heard Tenneson, Steve, you two talk about community and the work that we can do to imagine this space. So they talk about space, folks gathering in space, connecting. Tenneson, what you said about the Zen statement, I love. I grabbed that one from what you shared. To provoke shared joy. Shared joy. What a better place results when everyone can participate in an inclusive way to provoke shared joy. So
very cool.
I'm curious. Our trio, we went a lot of places, and it was really fun. And there were so many themes that came up, and I don't know. I would invite Colleen. Colleen was at the cusp of a question. I think that would really be really interesting to share with the group. If you're willing to share that question, I would like to know what it is. But or you can certainly decline the invitation.
Well, we talked a lot about, Francis brought up this really great example about essentially self-regulating in the moment of being faced with like sort of a fight or flight situation, and how that is a form of self-care to be able to pause and not get into the fight, right? But to choose a better path. Francis, I don't want to speak for you. I hope I did that justice. And I guess it led me to also think about, how do we as leaders, managers, supervisors, people who are supposed to be modeling the way for others and to be building teams, how do we guide someone into self-regulation, or sorry, self-care, awareness, even when we see workplace behaviors that are exhibiting that we recognize as someone who's under stress or someone who needs to engage in self-care, but maybe might not be aware of it or open to it. How do we navigate that?
You know, what's interesting is when you all were writing there in your discussion around this notion of stimulus and response and pausing in that space, that's the definition of grace. I didn't know that. That grace is pausing before we react.
Yeah, I think normalizing, navigating that kind of call and response of recognizing when others need to kind of have that time of recentering. And in our group, I appreciate the conversation of that intergenerational aspect of that managing expectations around response time. So now with all our mediums of communication, there's that expectation to be available almost 24/7. And how do we balance and manage that with our messaging and emailing? And then the idea of being new traditional students, so many who are returning to being a student or a professional at the same time, and oftentimes caregiving for maybe their parents or their own children at the same time. And how do we recognize individuals as whole people, balancing, constantly reprioritizing their own work-life balance in situations?
Jump in. I think we're asked to do a lot in the way that you just spoke that. We're really asked to do a lot as human beings. And there are so many versions of complexity stories or high demand stories that we live as human beings. And maybe just the very notion that we're experimenting with self-care as an important part of that narrative matters. It might be that that's the era that we live in. We're just trying to reclaim the possibility that some of that matters. It's not hard to find metaphors or examples of things that we do habitually that we don't call self-care, but it's just part of who we are as human beings to try to stay healthy. We brush our teeth, typically. We floss, typically. Some of us do gym work or, develop the core a little bit. And all of those might not be called self-care things. They could be, that's fine. But it seems to me that they build off of a story of a desire for longevity and overall well-being. And so now, living in this era that we are, Steve, I think you named it before we got on the group call, the number of psychological diagnoses or something like that. Once upon a time, it was 6, and now there's over 200 or maybe more than that, right? The fact that we might live in an era where we get to nuance these notions of self-care that feeds the longer arc of who we are individually and communally, that feels like a big deal. And I think the other thing to put into this for me is that, excuse me, there's hard things in life. Like most of us have a hard thing or two. Some of us have many. And I'm thinking about the world of, I'm thinking about the world of some of the community organizers that I've worked with that run themselves ragged in the name of a good revolutionary cause, freedom, justice, liberation, and some of them die. And it's dramatic to say that, but that's a reality. Some of our best people, especially young people, they are heroically trying to do so much good and sacrificing. I don't know what the self-care should be there, right? But sacrificing the self-care in a way that has tragic endings also. I'm thinking about someone close to me in a recent conversation who was really in some despair. And boy, I was crossing my fingers as I talked to this person thinking, what do I name for him that might help in a respectful, loving, caring, and fierce way that says, I'm not going to let you harm yourself. And I was trying to name some of that stuff, and did, right? Which I, fingers crossed, hope help and hope add. But maybe the most basic point here is that if we adopt a story that is more rooted in some sustainable, kind, good ways, and I feel like I'm always qualifying that. I'm not just talking about being nice. Like there's a fierceness to me about how we recognize some of the regulation that any of us need or need in different ways as a contribution to the whole. There's a changed narrative there. Self-care is selfish care to self-care actually is a commitment to the whole. That I think is useful. That's useful, curious territory to me, and practice. And maybe one more thing, Steve, because you and I in our little sidebar conversation, we're talking about just the importance of just start. And it might be that self-care is that cup of coffee. It might be that self-care is 3 minutes alone where I just breathe. But something like the freedom or the kindness in the story that says, just start, or just keep doing that bit that you're doing, that feels like it's pretty useful.
Yeah, one of the things, I think I'd love for us to, in the chat, to crowdsource, what are some things that you could do over the next day that you'll do today or tomorrow? What are some things that you do that foster self-care for yourself? I'd love for us to crowdsource some ideas in the chat. If you could just put some things that you do in there. I was going to put it in a Google Doc. We'll put that in there and we'll send it out to you all, you know, that we're here. But I think just in the chat would be fine. You know, for me, I think what I talked about, Tenneson, that I do, and what I'm realizing is what I'm taking away from you, what I'm going to do is do things and not worry about how much time it is, or it being perfect. I'm just gonna, like you said, just do it, just get started. You talked about that, your doctor's appointment. You asked that question, and it was just do something.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What is the line between self-care and selfish care?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know,
Yeah.
but it's a good experiment.
I
Is
think
it
depends on the
perception?
Okay,
It might depend on the person.
Is it other people's perception? Does it become selfish care through other people's eyes, but it's self-care through our own?
Yeah, or maybe the reality too, Catherine, of if you commit to self-care, chances are, if you look for it, you're going to find some people that say, yeah, bullshit, that's selfish care.
Right.
So how do we ground ourselves enough to say, yeah, okay, sure, but I'm still going to do it?
I think you know it when you see it. I think trust the people that you're close to let you know that you're doing good self-care versus selfish care. Maybe, you know.
I think there's a cultural aspect to whether what you're doing is deemed selfish or self-care. I grew up in an era long before many of you guys were born, up in Maine, where the standard phrase when you were taking time for yourself, as we'd say it, was, well, now you're being selfish.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you should be working, or you should be looking after your grandmother, or whatever. Taking time for yourself, which is my understanding of self-care, was looked at like wasting not just your time, but the family's time or the community's time. And I'm being hard on all those people. It wasn't quite that bad, but just enough. So you kind of hesitated before you did something just for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
maybe because up there we needed each other. I mean, it was rough living, and we didn't want anyone wandering off, you know, smelling the roses, because, you know, something could happen and we would need them. Similar to what's happening in Maui. You know, one day everything's wonderful, the next day we really, really need each other. And so, and to make the point that when you grow up where it can get rough suddenly, which is the case up in Maine, you have a little different outlook on what taking time means.
I think it comes back to also managing expectations. So this idea that being everything to all people at all times, or in different aspects or facets of our lives. So for example, I have colleagues in our cohort who are also caregivers for parents. And so thinking about what that means when, you know, compartmentalizing in the sense that, okay, a certain time of the day, being a professional, a certain time of the day or week, being a student, in other times of the day, being a caregiver, caring for others. And then where does that leave, or what time does that leave, right? Giving the self-care almost comes last, if at all. And so thinking about prioritizing when is the time to take a break or a breath, or even scheduling that in somewhere, is, I think, somewhat of an interesting concept from someone else's perspective. It's, they need something at a particular point in time where it's urgent in their, you know, lens, but also what is our capacity to give during that time frame, or balancing that, whether it's like, for example, working from home, right, may seem like something that's, you know, maybe the person appears to be available because they're in proximity, but it's that also that having that time and space to separate that focus needed to fully, maybe not in a perfectionist sense, but to dedicate the time and focus needed to be fully present in being able to support in that way, whether it's professionally or personally or otherwise.
Thank you, Lisa. It's time for us to wrap up, and we're going to have more conversations. Tenneson and I we just wanted to have a series. So you'll hear an invitation. You'll get all the invitations that we send out. So just be on the lookout for that. Any closing comments from anybody? And then Tenneson, I'm going to ask you to close us out. But does anybody have anything that they would like to share before we say goodbye?
Thank you for the precious gift of your time and attention, and caring for each other.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, I'm grateful too. Thank you, Tenneson. This was fun and somewhat mischievous, but I think more of a really, I think, openness, and I think we were willing to explore different things. So I appreciate that. Any closing comments from you for us?
I think 3 things. One, thanks, Steve, in the same spirit. It's like, let's be in good learning friendship together. That matters in the world. A second was the person that just spoke. I lost where she is now on my screen, but Lisa, thank you. It was something about the like, what in the world is self-care? If we are able to express unapologetically a form that brings self some joy or freedom, that's probably a useful thing. If you need to go belt out a song in the shower, do that kind of thing, right? Like, there's something that lives underneath it that seems like it's fertile starting ground when the path is named as self-care, something like that. Like, that's, if it's your soul's expression, chances are that's going to do some good somewhere inside here and make you more available. Or that's how I would follow that with other people. All of that. There's just so much more to explore in all of that. But hey, cool.
Yeah. So before you go, if you want to, in the chat, just type maybe a question that you'd love to come back to. Hey, if we meet again, what would be a question you'd like to have us cover? Maybe a question, anything really, that you'd love to explore in another conversation with Tenneson and with all of us. Again, thank you.
Let me do one more. Sorry, I know we're a minute over.
Yeah, no, it's great. No.
The third thing I wanted to name is just this little Rumi reference. So the 13th century Persian poet, and it's a phrase that I like and I use quite a bit. He says, "Yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I am changing myself." I love that as some further inspiration for, dig into the deeper poetic that already lives within us. There's a wisdom in it. Thanks for today.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Tenneson. That's perfect.
Good. Thanks, everyone. Go well.
Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.